Welcome to Global One Media's Stocks to Watch. I'm Michael Suido. Joining me today is Christopher Willis. He's the managing partner of Latitude World, their company that helps investors obtain a second passport or residency in some pretty nice places, like St. Lucia in the Caribbean and Malta in the Mediterranean, not to mention Europe and North America. Christopher, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Michael. Great to be here.
So you've been helping people emigrate and settle in new countries since 1995. Before we really get into it, I'm curious, what attracted you to this industry?
Well, it's a great question because it was actually purely by accident. I mean, I trained initially in the fitness industry and I was looking to start in that space. But then, it's often, who you know, not what you know. And one of my flatmates when I was living in London at the time was working for a UK immigration firm and they were looking for people. So I went along, learned about, UK immigration, which typically then meant you were keeping a lot of Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders, and then found out they suddenly fell in love with British people, so they wanted spousal applications, and then it was this whole sort of two-way started happening. And then found out Canada had a program, being a proud Canadian, researched it. And back at that time, I just made an appointment with a program manager at the High Commission in London, said, we're going to be doing this. How do you want to see a file? They just sort of said, if you do this, do this, do this, that makes our life easier. And that's what we started doing. And it just went from there. So it's, back in the day, it was much easier to have those appointments and have those conversations. And that's really where it all started.
I think you moved overseas about the same time that I did, perhaps. Tell me, I'm just curious, how many passports do you have?
I've got 3 at the moment.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to pry too much. I won't ask.
Yeah, and a work permit as well. So I've got 4 bases covered. I used to have permanent residency in Australia, but I didn't end up doing the days, so that lapsed. So I've got a few different stamps in the different passports.
That's awesome. Let's dive a bit into it. There are a few reasons why high net worth individuals may wish to obtain a second citizenship. For some, tax and lifestyle benefits are top of mind. For others, safety and security is a primary motivation. Walk us through that second one. How does investing in a second citizenship help increase a family's safety and security?
Well, it's becoming a much more of a non-traditional insurance policy, if you like, because, 4 or 5 years ago, this wasn't really, in the mainstream for Americans. It's always been there for people who are coming from countries that have very poor visa-free travel. So, for example, if you were from Pakistan, from South Africa, from Nigeria, places like that, where you always had to apply for visas, your passports were tied up at embassies. It was a real problem. And as an American, as a Canadian, as a Brit, you take it for granted that you can just hop on a plane and go pretty well anywhere in the world. So the motivation factors for people of that profile were very much the mobility. But from the United States, you have that privilege already. But the real kicker was when the pandemic was in full swing and you had the travel ban in the United States. Didn't matter who you were. If you only had a US passport, you weren't traveling, to Europe, to the UK, to Singapore, to the UAE. So your wings were well and truly clipped. And that was a wake-up call for a lot of people. So suddenly you saw this spike from the United States where people were saying, okay, I need to cover this base because, I was exposed during the pandemic that I couldn't do that. But then in terms of not just from that, from the travel side, but the protection side, which is what you're asking. So in the Caribbean, for example, the islands all shut their borders, during the pandemic. So unless you were a citizen, you were not granted entry because as a citizen, of course, you're protected by the state. So they will give you that access to the country. So people were looking at this and saying, okay, if let's say the place where I am in the United States, I'm not too comfortable, I want to have a safe haven elsewhere, or maybe I want to go and spend 6 months plus a year, or maybe my kids want to go study there. If I've got status, then it's much easier to do so than either going as a visitor, going in as an international student, and all the things that go with it. So it's becoming much more in the mainstream, from the perspective of an American. They're looking at this saying, look, I've got to have this as part of my portfolio. And, with the world being, in a very volatile time at the moment, many people are saying, look, I need to make sure I've got somewhere to go should I need it. So it's that old adage, it's better to to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Right. So that's where people are just sort of saying, let's just have that in the back pocket just in case.
I mean, what you say about during the pandemic makes total sense. And you talk about volatility. And there's certainly no shortage of that in the world today. Even as talking about it. You have the war in Ukraine, you have the war in the Middle East right now, which people are worried is going to expand. I'm curious, given all that, are you seeing an increase in demand of people coming to you saying, we'd like to have dual citizenship?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's, the pandemic was one thing, from the perspective of the American market, but, we're always very busy in the Middle East. We have a very large office in Dubai, which caters for the Middle East, Northern African region. Also, we've opened office in other parts of Asia, Africa as well. So typically where there's push factors, whether it's, based on security, geopolitical, it could be financial, like South Africa, the rand is very weak at the moment. We've seen what happened in Lebanon with their currency. So people are looking at different reasons why they want to do it, to protect their assets, to protect their family. And part of our process, of course, is to really dig deep with a client and say, look, what's your motivation? Why do you want to do this? Then look at their time scales, look at their budget, and then we can sort of suggest what programs might be best suited, because everybody's unique, right? And they're going to have their own reasons to do this. So, right now, when everything was happening, well, it's still happening, obviously, in Ukraine, there was a surge, if you like, for people from that region who were nervous, and then also in the other CIS countries, the stands, as we call it, the Uzbekistans, the Kazakhstans, and all of that, they're also now looking, to have an option, because they're concerned what may expand, from that territory. And as you rightly say, what's happening in the Middle East is going to have a knock-on effect, with the regions, surrounding. So whether it's in Jordan, whether it's in Egypt, whether it's in Syria, all these people are getting a little bit nervous, and so it's saying, where can I go? And you're reading in the news about Canada saying we're going to go in and we're going to help the dual citizens be able to have safe passage back. Same with other countries, the UK, the US will be doing similar things. But if you don't have that privilege, then you're really restricted in terms of what you can do.
So, Chris, if someone comes to you, I imagine most of the times they're not coming because they're thinking about themselves. They're thinking about their family, about their wife, their children, possibly their parents. I don't imagine all of them are going to be applying for dual citizenship. So if one person applies, can that dual citizenship help them locate their loved ones to a safer area as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, in the Caribbean, some of the countries allow for parents to be included, grandparents in some cases, as well as siblings if they're unmarried and have no children. So there's a whole extension of family members that can be included on one application.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I'm living in Asia and family is everything. So hearing that parents and grandparents can be included, that's really important. I want to talk to you now about how someone gets that second passport. There are a couple routes, I understand. It could be by descent. For example, if you have an Irish-born parent or grandparent, you could qualify for an Irish passport, which then can be used to, and help you reside anywhere in the EU. And then there are investment programs. So say you purchase a property in Greece that's worth at least 250,000 euros. Well, then you're eligible for a Greek golden visa. If you want to live in the Cayman Islands, though, you're going to need a bit more, at least $1 million or 1.2 million to be exact. So let's start with that investment route. What is your company's role? How do you work with a client who comes to you and says, I want to live overseas or obtain a second nationality via this route?
So the important consideration here is residency versus citizenship. So some people may say, look, I just need a residence card because I want to have access to a region such as the Schengen area, for example, which you would get with a residence card either from Portugal, from Spain, or from Greece. If you were looking at citizenship, however, the direct pathway to citizenship gives you the passport. And for many people, as we touched on earlier, who have those mobility problems, that's maybe the ultimate aim. So this is where when we have that breakdown with a client to understand their full motivations, then we can say what's most important, residency status or citizenship status. Because you've also got those who actually want to physically move. We know there's programs in Canada, United Kingdom, United States, where people want to move and formally relocate their family there. But many people just want to maintain their own residency in their home country, but have options elsewhere just in case they need it. So that's really where it's first of all determining residency versus citizenship. Once that's established, then we can sort of look at the different programs, because some of the residency programs take much longer to come through, whereas the citizenship ones in the Caribbean can be relatively quick, around 6 to 7 months. But then you've got two ends of the spectrum. So if you look at the Caribbean citizenship programs, the investments currently, the minimum is 100,000 at the moment, and it varies from country to country. But at the other end of the spectrum, you have Malta, where you're looking at about €1 million. It's going to be your investment level. Yeah, so that's but the difference being is you're getting citizenship in a European Union country, which then gives you the settlement rights in all the member states. So it's a much higher proposition than, let's say, what you would get in the Caribbean, which gives you settlement rights within the Caribbean community, but that's not to the same level, let's say, as the European Union.
Yeah, just a couple quick things there. You mentioned Schengen, so that's referring to Europe. And when you talked about
Yes.
having essentially a passport in your back pocket, I think back to Hong Kong in the 1980s and 1990s. You had a lot of people there who were getting second passports in Canada or elsewhere because they were concerned about what was going to happen when Hong Kong went back to China. It wasn't they necessarily wanted to live overseas. They just wanted to have that escape route if they needed it.
Exactly right. And that's a great example. I mean, Canada was a residency program. So you have to first get your residency status, and then you can, over time, graduate to get naturalized as a Canadian citizen, very much like a green card holder in the United States. So, in Canada, we call it permanent residency. The United Kingdom calls it indefinite leave to remain. US is the green card. So it varies from country to country and what they call it. But the principle is the same. You're granted permanent status, you do your time, then you can upgrade, if you like, to full citizenship, which then gives you the privilege of a passport.
All right, I want to look at this from a different angle now. We have a lot of investors who tune in to watch this series. What are the benefits of a second citizenship in terms of succession and legacy planning? I mean, I'm wondering, am I not just creating a second tax liability?
No. I mean, that's a great question. I mean, a lot of people are now obviously looking for their kids, and we do a lot of work with family offices, and so they are looking, what's happening down the line, what's it like, legacy planning, etc. And so and going back to my earlier example about during the pandemic, is that that base wasn't covered, so they said, look, we're going to make sure the kids and the future generations are going to have access to these other jurisdictions. So that's become first and foremost now, is looking after future generations and future planning. But then you've also got, the here and now. And that's where people are also saying, if I want to go and spend 6 months somewhere, where's that going to be? Is it going to be in Portugal? Is it going to be in Greece? Is it going to be in Cayman? Because these are the types of things, there's a lifestyle element that'll come into it. So the Caribbean, for example, from a US perspective, is very popular because it's geographically very close and also very familiar. Many Americans have spent some time in the Caribbean at some point. So there is that comfort level. If some people, you say, hey, why don't we look at Malta? And they're saying, where's Malta? Right. So it doesn't have the same necessary knowledge. People aren't aware of it as they would maybe of Portugal or Spain. But I mean, Malta is a phenomenal country, very, very diverse, very unique sort of culture, but gives you, again, that full access to the European Union as a European Union member state. So it does have some very interesting perks. And that's something we've seen a lot of interest from high net worth, ultra high net worth in the United States, who want the European status as opposed to the Caribbean. But, like we said, it's to each their own, right? For some people, a Schengen card, residency card is good enough. Others, a Caribbean citizenship is good enough. But others do want the highest prize, which is European Union.
I don't know who you're talking. I want both. So tell us, before we wrap up, what's the number one tip that you would offer someone who's contemplating moving overseas or obtaining a second passport?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing is don't leave it to the last minute. If you qualify now, apply now, because there's a couple of things here. We've seen St. Kitts and Nevis recently doubled the amount of their investment. The UK, when they changed their tier one, they basically stopped it overnight. Ireland, it was similar. Portugal made some significant changes by removing the real estate component out of their program. So if changes happen, governments change, policies change, programs change. So if you qualify today and you really want to do it, don't delay, because smart money's done this already, and people are looking at this as a viable option, and you don't want to miss the boat. Because the other side of it is the citizenship by descent, which isn't affected to the same way as these investor programs are. Because you touched on the Irish, Irish and Italians in particular, Polish as well from the United States. There's a huge diaspora, and so people are looking at this as a way to get European citizenship without having to make the large investment. So that is attractive for many people, and also in the context of what we're seeing in Israel at the moment, there's many Jewish Americans who may be eligible if they can demonstrate that they have family members who were displaced through persecution. So that could lead to citizenship in Germany, Poland, Austria, countries like that. So there's, I guess it goes back to my earlier point. This is where we need to really sit down, speak to someone, get to know a little bit about them. Because I'll finish on one interesting example. Recently, we were speaking to this person who was interested in Malta. And digging a bit deeper, we noticed their surname sounded a little bit Italian. So we dug a bit and then find out they were actually eligible through descent. So therefore, they wouldn't have to go through investment. So we saved them €1 million by going through that program as opposed to the investment program. So it is really getting to know the client and seeing what the best solutions would be. At Latitude Group, we've got over 20 offices around the world. Been doing this for a long time, and so we're pretty good at finding the right solutions for people who are looking at this option.
That's fantastic, Christopher. Really interesting to learn about how your business is working with people during times of uncertainty. No doubt there are people watching this right now who had never thought about dual citizenship before, but are now contemplating it. So thank you very much for sharing your insights.
Thank you, Michael. Pleasure to chat with you.